Right, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's lunchtime webinar entitled Managing Through Current Milk Challenges. My name's Steve West. I'm Knowledge Exchange Manager at AHDB Dairy, and I'm joined today by Neil Wilson from SAB Advisory, who will cover some of the financial considerations of all of this. Hefin Richards from Rumenation, who will focus on cutting purchase feed costs and cow management. And lastly, and certainly not leastly, Owen Atkinson from Veterinary Consultancy, who will help us to avoid some of the unintended consequences on herd health of making the wrong decisions at this time. So a bit of a note of housekeeping. This is relatively new for all of us to have multiple panelists. So if you could just bear with us, there may be a couple of clunks at times and interruptions, but we'll endeavour to make sure it's as seamless as possible. There should be a question box on the right-hand side on your view. So please do type in questions all the way through. Any sort of technical issues, if you could type those into there. And we'll make sure we ask the most relevant of questions for today in today's webinar, but we will answer every single one of those questions and we'll publish the results of that on our website after the meeting. I just want to also make clear that today is about giving you some practical help at cost control and managing cash flow. We don't plan to get into detail on specific processes or talk about industry politics. I'm sure that the farming unions are happy to take your call if you want to talk about what they're doing to lobbying governments, but today we won't cover that. By all means, do type in any questions and we can add those to the answers that will follow this meeting. It is the first of a series of webinars, and we do have another one booked in for the earlier time of 12 p.m. Next week, the 23rd of April. So let's get on. I want to set the scene really on why we're doing this. It's mid-April 2020. We've experienced 3 weeks of lockdown during the global COVID-19 pandemic. Restaurants and food outlets, whereas we know lots of dairy products are consumed, are shut, and some of our supply chains are creaking a bit due to staff absence as a result of COVID illness and childcare shortage. So most people are at home. So what have we actually seen? In the immediate aftermath of food service outlets closing, a spike in retail demand helped to soak up some of the excess milk supplies, so that some of the homeless milk couldn't find a market. However, at that initial surge, so as that initial surge started in retail demand, as that initial surge in retail, the demand in dairy dropped back a bit, and the extra milk has flooded onto the spot market, suppressing the price. And that's resulted in pressure on the industry. Now, we've seen some processors actively asking their suppliers to reduce output, and we've even seen farmers disposing of milk on farm where collections can't be made. Today's webinar specifically looks at those practical considerations you must make if you fall into the bracket of farmers hardest hit by this pressure. Next week, we'll be looking more into general output and cost reduction methods. So today it's very practical. Some of the measures that we're going to be talking about today aren't best practice when in times of business as usual. So I'd really like you to remember that context as we go through. It's a direction of travel. It's a starter. It's how you should be thinking rather than actual on-farm advice. So I'd really emphasize that if you want farm-specific solutions, take these ideas away and speak to your advisors about your particular farm situation. So at this moment, you've heard enough of me for a moment. I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, Neil, Each speaker will be talking for 10 minutes. Then we're going to open it up into a panel afterwards. So if I can get the slide to, there we go. Right, Neil, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Steve, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all well in these difficult times. But look, today I'm going to look a bit more at the financial elements of your business. And Steve, you just want to flick on to the next slide. But there's a fair element of this stuff that you as farm businesses and farm managers will already know. But it's always worth a brief reminder of these things and to get some focus on to them. So first of all, let's look at cost reduction strategies. I think top of the list for me is to target non-essential expenditure. You know, we all know on farm there are some nice to haves, just things that you do or spend money on that make life a little bit easier. My view would be is that have a look at those and get them stopped as quickly as you can. In terms of off-farm expenditure, you know, anything you can do to minimise your drawings out of the business. You know, things like you know, stopping school fees. If you take money out of the farm business to roll into investments, it would probably be worthwhile thinking about putting a halt on them too. You know, so that's the sort of what you might class as non-essential stuff in terms of the crisis that we're facing just now. You should also be looking to target the unprofitable animals in the herd, and also maybe think about drying off low yielders, depending where you are in your particular system. And I'm sure Hefin and Owen might comment on practicalities of that later on. Some other things to think about are, you know, sell any surplus stock that you might have. So if you keep a little beef enterprise on the side, it might be time to look at cashing some of that in to reduce cost. Might also realise some extra cash for you. And any equipment that you've got lying about that you don't necessarily use on a regular basis, or again, it's a nice to have. Is there a way you could part with that? Again, maybe reduce some of the cost if there's HP against it, realise some cash. You might be able to come to an agreement with a neighbour to share a bit of equipment that you both need, or something along those kind of lines. So again, just have that in your mind. Something that as an industry we've probably not really heard of before, but you know, this furloughing of staff that you may have heard about where possible. Again, it might be if you're at the right point in the particular season or system that you've got, or actually you may have reduced stock. You know, the ability to furlough staff might be helpful to reduce some costs. You may have to do a bit more yourself, or of course you could use maybe some relief milking where required. The bottom line is, to me, just be really, really tough on your costs. Don't leave any stone unturned. If you don't absolutely need it, then don't have it. But be aware of what may cause long-term damage to your business. You know, but I think this is emergency times, so really hammering down hard on costs would be great. Word of warning though, you know, a bit of learning from the downturn we had sort of 3-4 years ago. No radical changes really without interrogating the options and maybe taking some advice on them. And don't necessarily chase litres to dilute costs. That wasn't always a great strategy back in 2016, however tempting it may be. So if we go on to look at cash management strategies, these can be a bit more challenging to tackle, but the starting point really has to be working out what cash shortfall you expect to have. So in reality, what I'm saying to you there is, you know, have some sort of budget or cash flow forecast. If you find that a challenge to do, reach out and try and get help from somebody. First point would be, if you've got any of your own funds personally, introduce these where possible to get you through sort of initial issues. Again, we've touched on the selling surplus stock and equipment. Again, furloughing staff, that might be something you can do to help you, you know, just reduce some of your labour costs in the short term. I would say also, you know, don't be shy about approaching creditors to see if you can extend terms or reschedule current terms. You know, if you're up to date, use the full credit terms that might be available to you, which could be, 14 days, 30 days. If you've already stretched those creditors, again, don't be scared. Get on the phone and do a bit of negotiating with them, because any extension to those will just help you in terms of managing your cash. If you've got HP, get on the phone to those HP companies, start talking about repayment holidays. From what I've heard and seen, many seem open to this. And even if you can negotiate a 3 or a 6 month delay, that can just help you again with cash flow. Something that I've not put in there, but there are additional support measures that government have put in place to help with cash flow. So there are things like VAT and tax deferrals, not cancellations. You will be due to pay at some point in time, but initially, again, that might just help ease the cash flow burden. And there are some self-employed support schemes, but get in touch with your accountant probably to talk about some of them and whether you qualify. And once you've gone through all of these options, then the next stage might be talking to the bank and approaching them for additional support. But if you can approach some of these other options or explore some of these other options before you approach the bank, then all the better. If you do need to go to the bank, and you need to request extra funding, what sort of strategy do we need around about that? Well, look, I think the most important thing to think about, the track record of your business is I've put here an important element. It might even be appropriate to say a vital element. In my experience, good track record should give you a really good chance of extra support from the bank. What do we need to provide? Well, just a clear and credible future plan. Make it concise. It doesn't need to be War and Peace. It doesn't need to be lots of pages long. But within that, you'll need to really know things like, what's your cost of production or your break-even milk price look like? What cost reductions can you demonstrate? Let's be really clear on what can be done over the short term, whilst keeping in mind what is sustainable in the longer term. So again, you might have a sort of really short-term emergency cost base that might get you through 6 to 12 months, but really for your dairy business would not be sustainable over the much longer term. But again, just think about how you can do that and then move back to whatever business as usual might look like in the future. If you're making any strategic changes, that might be sort of major moves, then you're really going to have to explain what those look like. And again, the plan must be credible. Align it back with your track record. It's going to be difficult for a bank to believe that you're going to make massive fundamental changes from what the track record position is going to be. I would suggest including technical benchmarks. Just show how good are you technically against your peer group, and I know AHDB will have benchmarking figures you could use to do that. That just demonstrates how how good you are at the on-farm management piece. As I've said before, a cash flow and budget should be included. You can get support to complete this if necessary through advisors or consultants. There are tools available at a variety of bank and accountancy websites that can start getting you pointed in the right direction. And again, be clear, with the bank what you're asking for. Are you looking for a capital holiday and a loan? Are you needing more cash? And then think about how you might repay that over the longer term from cash flow or from an asset sale, whatever's going to suit your business best. And as I said before, other finance companies will need to play their part. I don't think that banks will want to be funding repayments to other finance businesses. I think one of the most important things to do in all of this, though, is to be honest with yourself and your family. That just don't set out unachievable plans. Do you really, really want to do this? Can you achieve it? What is within your own management capability? The support is out there to help. It does cost money, but it really can help you, make some really crucial decisions for the long-term future of your business. Now, one thing I haven't touched on, which I'll finish with here, is you may have heard of the CBILS, which is the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme. This is what the government have set out as a sort of rescue package for businesses. Farms are eligible, and viable businesses pre-COVID-19 should receive support. So if you'd been viable and COVID hadn't hit and you would have been viable in the long term, then you should be able to get some sort of support. So farm businesses are eligible. There's the potential to borrow up to 5 million over a term of up to 6 years. The first year is fee and interest free, up to, for farmers, the sterling equivalent of €100,000. However, please bear in mind that the repayment over the remaining term of 2 to 5 years is quite a capital undertaking, and that will be very, very tight for most businesses, even in sort of normal milk pricing circumstances, and will add to your cost of production. So you might want to consider approaching the bank and looking for commercial lending terms. Other things to think about are, look, the banks are operating at full capacity just now, so early action is important. Steve, back to you. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Neil. I think that was fantastically concise, and I know we'll get some questions from that. So I'm going to move swiftly on in the interest of time. So I moved on a bit ahead of time, actually, but straight over to Hefin Richards, who's going to talk us through a little bit about some of the consideration on the nutrition side. So over to you, Hefin.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you everybody for signing in. So obviously nutrition is one of the key areas we've got to look at in terms of managing what we're being asked to achieve by a number of the milk buyers. So if we can go on to the next slide, please, Steve. Essentially, I see three scenarios. We've got sort of the first, where there's no clear requirement from the processor to drop production, but quite a significant number of farmers are taking action to pull their production back, essentially on a voluntary basis to help and for the greater good. So, this will undoubtedly just help to coin a phrase, sort of flatten the curve. So, that's very much a voluntary thing, and there are people that are actively doing that now, one way or the other. We've then got the sort of the middle ground. For example, Muller, who've asked for a 3% reduction as of last week. Again, a fairly moderate reduction, really, which can be achieved without making too many drastic changes. Then the high risk strategy really is the third. The severe amendments are in terms of processor contract terms. For example, Freshways Nutri, where they've significantly cut back on the A litre allocation, which will mean that there'll be a 55–60% of the original allocation paid for at a reduced A litre price, and then any additional production will be at a B litre price, which is certainly not looking very, very healthy at all. So anybody in that third scenario is going to have to make some pretty significant changes in order to pull production back. So the aim in that scenario 3, and that's really where I'm going to focus on now. I think 1 and 2 are really just tinkering around the edges. 3 calls for some pretty full-on action to achieve changes very quickly. So the aim has to be to minimise the production of B litres. They're of unknown value and likely to be well below the cost of producing them. So we're looking at B litres, I would say, significantly below 10p a litre, and they could even be below 5, who knows. So producing them and hoping is not really a good strategy in my view. We need to maintain cash flow by any means, so there might be an opportunity to sell some stock, whether that's beef animals or move culls, and there might be an opportunity as well alongside that for some forage sales. So if somebody has, for example, got a surplus of silage or maize as a result of reducing stock numbers, then it's worth carrying out a good forage inventory and perhaps looking to sell some surplus forage on as well if there's a market locally. The other big one is to reduce purchase feed costs significantly to try and help mitigate against the lost milk income. We're not pretending for a minute that we're going to be able to recoup that, but we do need to just take steps, and obviously purchase feed is a significant part of monthly cost. But ultimately, we also, and certainly for any business who decides that they want to get through this and not throw the towel in, and there's no shame in that. For many, it may be the straw that breaks the camel's back, and they take the decision that they're going to exit the industry either permanently or even temporarily. For anybody else, we need to be aware and have one eye beyond this crisis, and try and maintain the potential to rebuild the herd and production levels post COVID-19 and the spring flush, which is where we find ourselves now. So in summary, I would see this as a not particularly positive scenario, but it's very much down to damage limitation. So next slide, please, Steve. So damage limitation, as we've heard already, yeah, certainly cull, any target or prospective culls. If you can't get them moved, and obviously a lot of people are going to have the same idea and try and move cull cows on, and there's a limit how many cull cows can be processed, but you've always got the option to remove them from the milking herd, and particularly, at this time of year, perhaps put them out to grass somewhere where they're not going to cost you anything, but they're not going to be producing milk and costing you in terms of producing milk of very low value. So look at target culls, look at cows that are destined for cull, perhaps later in the season, bring that forward and take those out of the system. A lot of people have already done this in the last week or so, and what's quite fascinating really, in a number of cases, it doesn't have the effect that people expect. It has obviously an immediate effect for the day or two after they're removed, but then lo and behold, we often find that more space, more feed space, etc., and the rest of the herd go on and produce a drop more milk, and we're back to square one. So I'm not saying don't do it, but at the same time, it may only give a very short-term hit if the rest of your cows are in a position to respond to having more room and feed space, etc. Another one that sort of isn't necessarily an option to everyone, but it may be an option to you, is to market some fresh calvers. And I've had some clients already who've managed to do this. You might think, well, who on earth is buying cows at this point? Well, we've got a significant number of flying herds, all year round calving, that obviously need to replace or want to replace animals that are leaving the herd, on a month by month basis. So, just as they were sort of a month ago, there is a market for some fresh calvers. So providing you're not shut down with TB, that may be an option, and it may be one that will actually bring some cash in, and it will take a significant chunk of milk out of your system for the next few weeks. Like I say, not an option for everyone, but if it is an option, it's perhaps worth exploring with local agents and auctioneers who are sorting out farm to farm movements. I think the big one really is to graze a proportion, or possibly the whole herd, or if you do graze a proportion of the herd, perhaps graze more cows than usual. It's a bit of a double-edged sword, this. I think the fact that COVID-19 has hit us as we're sort of heading into the spring flush has certainly put huge pressure on processing and on the milk market generally, but at least it does give us, in many cases, the option to get some cows out onto grazing and make some significant cost savings there. This may be the case with housed herds where they don't normally graze. If you can get some cows out onto grass, late lactation, mid to late lactation cows, it will significantly reduce not only concentrate costs, but sort of day-to-day running cost as well. So, that is certainly one which I think, if it's possible to do it, you should do it for definitely a proportion of the herd. The other one then, obviously, concentrate and purchase feeds, whether it's moist feeds, byproducts, etc. We're in a situation here, if we're looking to get down to 60% or thereabouts, we've got to be looking to cut concentrate levels. Very much farm specific. Obviously, the more you're feeding, the higher input system you have, the more scope you've got to pull back. If you're already on a very low input system, you haven't got as much room to shift on this one. But essentially, we need to be cutting concentrate levels, and especially the higher protein feeds. The other thing that's happened in the last few weeks, we've seen quite a rally on protein feeds, soya, particularly rape meal as well, as crushing has ground to a halt because of low oil prices. So we've got the double whammy really of higher cost protein feeds if we're going to continue using them. So we've got a real advantage there if we can cut protein back, pull milk production back that way, and make some significant cost savings. On spot market, for example, soya currently is 35, 36p a kilo. Rape, if you can get it, probably in the 26, 27p. So if we can pull that back, we do have the opportunity perhaps to pull milk production back, but at the same time maintain some body condition. So the question mark on individual farms is, do you try and graze all cows, mid and late lactation cows? I think in the vast majority of cases, there is a very, very compelling case for grazing mid and late lactation cows, even if it's just day grazing, whatever grass you've got available around the farm. Get those out, pull some cost and pull some production down. Pregnant cows should be fairly robust. We don't want to be interfering with things which are going to impact on the long term, so we do need to keep transitioning cows in. We do need to keep getting cows pregnant. So I think if we look at mid and late lactation cows, and essentially cows that are pregnant, they're fairly robust and we can really make them work. Feed supplements and fats, I think you really just got to remove them now. You know, they're there to drive production, which currently has no additional value. So I think we've got to be really, really brutal on what's going in there and pull as much cost out as possible. Minerals could possibly fall into that category, but I would be wary of just pulling the plug on mineral supplementation. But again, just maintain basic mineral supplementation. Make sure that you do supplement magnesium if you're putting cows out to grass. It's quite possible a lot of people will end up grazing some silage ground that will have had potash applied or slurry applied, so there'll be a higher risk of staggers with that. So don't skimp to the point of not putting any magnesium in, and I would carry on with some basic mineral supplementation just to keep that trickling in. The limitations will include the farm system, feeding and housing facilities. Is it achievable to split cows into groups? Is grazing feasible? Is there grassland available near the farm buildings, for example? You know, what's the infrastructure? Are there water troughs? You know, for some herds that have got a fully housed system, trying to get any amount of grazing in is going to be very, very challenging in the short term. So it's very much a farm specific thing, and I think every farm that I'm working with where we've been faced with this, we've had to look at different strategies to get through it. Use of whole milk on farm. Well, certainly a lot of people are now looking to put calves onto whole milk, delaying weaning. Obviously, and I'm sure Owen will cover this shortly, there is a risk there with yonis, and it's one that needs to be really thought through. One option we've sort of discussed with a couple of clients is to identify cows, mature cows that have been subject to yonis testing for a number of lactations. If they've been consistently clear, it might be an option to try and put those in a group and then make sure that the milk from that group of cows is what goes into calves, certainly into heifer calves. Might be an opportunity to rear beef calves for movement post weaning. If you're generally selling young calves on that are going to a rearer onto a beef unit, it may be that it'll be more economic for both parties to rear these calves on whole milk on the farm of birth. So again, you know, it's looking for ways to just get through this next few months and keep everything running as smoothly as possible. So a few of the examples that we've been looking at with specific farms. So house herds, single TMR traditionally. It's been very clear we've got to split into early versus mid and late lactation groups, really with a view of trying to protect the early lactation cows and body condition and fertility as much as possible. That saying, on the higher input herds, we've still gone in with a drop in concentrate, and typically what we've looked at is probably drop the concentrate input on the early lactation down to about 80% of existing, but then the mid and late lactation down typically to about 40%. So a pretty big hit on the mid-late lactation cows, but targeting cows that are pregnant and well into lactation and just accepting that it's damage limitation. Another option we've looked at was to put where grazing wasn't an option was to actually put late lactation cows, certainly for the last 120 days, on a silage only diet. One farm had got some pretty good quality big bale silage, so there's a group of cows now literally just getting silage and no concentrate supplementation whatsoever. So whatever milk they do produce is totally off farm grown forage. If there's a limited grazing area, well then it might be a good option to house until PD plus and then graze 100% and focus on keeping grass in front of them. I think we can safely say that fertilizer is cheaper than feed. So if you're in that situation, it's worth then making sure that you can keep that grass moving and graze as many cows as possible until we get signals that the marketplace has changed. Herds using a TMR plus parlour feed, well, again, I would drop the TMR density, particularly the protein content, and then only top up early lactation cows to give them a little bit more concentrate. Low protein again, so 14 to 16% protein concentrate, which in the current marketplace should be significantly cheaper than higher protein concentrates. So again, be ruthless, just be very clear that the average milk price doesn't actually exist. What you've got is two very distinctly different milk prices, one that is not very good and one that is likely to be terrible. So the terrible one doesn't really want to feature, and you've got to pull that production back. Grazing herds, well, review supplementary feeding, whatever level that is at. Again, target low protein concentrate at early lactation and open cows. Pregnant cows, mid and late lactation, challenge forage in terms of grazed grass as you would with silage. Milking frequency is another one that comes up for discussion. Certainly in this situation, I think 3x herds just drop back to 2x, take the pressure off and increase the forage proportion of the diet significantly. You know, that will give an immediate drop off in milk undoubtedly, as we see the opposite when we go from 2x to 3x generally. But at the same time, we've got to take some feed away and focus on getting more forage in just to keep them healthy, keep the solids on track, and take some cost out. You know, this option may actually also then lead into some of the things that Neil was saying, might actually free up the opportunity to furlough some staff and have a bigger impact than just the impact of feeding, etc., on the actual cost base. The question of going from 2x to once a day milking has come up as well. I think probably the big challenge with that and where sort of people are operating once a day systems, it's generally with a view of getting very high solids percentages and where they're supplying a market that rewards that. The processes that are really running on these sort of dramatic cutbacks now are generally more liquid based. So I'm just a little bit wary, unless production is very, very low already, that dropping back to once a day milking would make it very difficult to then build up some momentum and get going when all this is past us. And hopefully that will be sooner rather than later. Next slide, please, Steve. So looking beyond the current crisis and looking through to the other side, well, what do we want? Well, we want healthy cows with a target number pregnant, and that's why we've really got to focus on trying to keep early lactation cows particularly in good order and getting them pregnant, because otherwise we'll get through this and we'll have a load of empty cows and a load of low production cows, and we will not be able to get that momentum to get some output when the market has moved the other way. So it's very important that we keep on top of feet. If they haven't got healthy feet and we don't keep on top of that, then we're going to have problems. Mastitis and somatic cell count, again, Owen will cover this. Transition success. These are all things that are really, I think we need to protect as much as possible in order to give us a good chance of getting out through to the other side and starting to refill this hole. Forage quality is another one. We're sort of heading into first cut silage. There's a few already gone. I mean, again, it might be tempting to sort of go for bulk and just delay that and take some cost out. Just bear in mind that when you're looking into next autumn and winter, that forage quality and the forage that you make now is going to have a huge impact on the economics of producing that autumn and winter milk. So I think, again, if we can manage what's going on in the short term, but really focus on making high quality silage for next autumn and winter. Could even be in a situation now where you've got good forage stocks, and you've got maize stocks that you know, pull back on those now. Perhaps try and use up some poorer forage to get through this, with a view of holding back on some better forage or more maize for later in the season. So that if you've got the option on forages on the farm in clamps, then you know, I think it's wise to perhaps think, well, we'll keep the really good stuff for when we're trying to turn this job around again. Herd size, possibly going to end up with a reduced herd size going forward. That may give you the potential to improve performance and efficiency. So, you know, it may be that in many cases we're running just ahead of the optimum number in terms of the herd, in terms of housing, facilities, etc. So, although on one hand we think, well, the herd may have contracted through heavier culling or perhaps even selling some fresh calvers now, you know, all is not lost. That does give you some opportunity perhaps to just really focus on tightening up on other areas of feeding and management into the late summer and autumn, with a view of improving performance and ultimately efficiency. The other thing at the other side, I think a lot of people will be doing, is looking at milk buyer options, looking at perhaps who they want to be supplying in the future. Who knows what options will be available? We know at the moment that the doors are very much closed, but I think, you know, there are certainly a number who've perhaps felt that they wouldn't want to risk being in this situation again, and they want more diversity in terms of markets, in terms of handling their product. So to wrap it up, really, the take-home messages from me would be to plan now, but to act quickly. You know, we need a plan, but at the same time, we can't be thinking about it for a month. We need to make some fairly quick decisions. Cull low efficiency and problem cows as soon as possible. So low efficiency cows aren't always low yielding cows. They could be high yielding cows with ongoing problems. Consider early dry off, but manage body condition score. Big risk of gaining too much condition on long dry cows. So really you have to have a strategy to keep body condition off cows if they're going to be dry for 3-4 months, because otherwise you'll really pay the price when it comes to transition next time round. Target feed use and challenge forage. So really challenge forage intakes, really challenge forage to produce whatever you are going to produce over the next few months. Graze if at all possible, at least a proportion of the herd. You know, if it means putting some electric fencing up around some silage ground, if it means putting some temporary water troughs in, however you do it, if you can get 20-30% of those cows out onto grass in late lactation, you will have an immediate impact on feed cost and daily running cost. Protect the early lactation and open cows. They will need a feed reduction, but be sensible, a moderate feed reduction, but keep the diets balanced. Maintain your cow health protocols. Again, you want a herd of cows that you can work with when we get through to the other side. Discuss the ideas that you have with other people, whether it's neighbours, friends, advisors, suppliers even. Just bounce them around. You know, you might find somebody else will just throw in something which you think, well, yeah, I wouldn't have thought of that, but it might just work. So, you know, don't just try and work it all out yourself. Bounce it around and talk to people that can help. Above all, be safe. It's a horrible time, and a lot of us are out there committed to help you get through it. So thank you, and we look forward to some questions in a few minutes.
Thank you very much, Hefin. We'll move swiftly on to Owen, if we may. I'm just on the wrong screen now. So over to you, Owen.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you, Hefin and Neil. All good sound advice. So, Steve, do you want to just move to the next slide? I'm just going to start just with a basic image here, just explaining some of the similarities and differences between dairy businesses with other businesses. Obviously, due to the COVID-19 and the restrictions, and the lockdown, there are many businesses of all different types under severe financial stress at the moment, but I just think it's worthwhile looking at why dairy farms are different. So we all, as businesses, we have inputs and we have outputs, which is our sales, and we try and turn a profit in the middle. Steve, next slide. And for most businesses, those inputs are purchased goods, labour and fixed costs. Next slide, please, Steve. Dairy farmers, no difference. You've got your purchase feeds as your purchase goods is the main bought input. You've got your labour costs and you've got your fixed costs. So whereas other businesses, and I'm thinking now the likes of shops, barbers, pubs, etc., faced with no sales, which is an abrupt financial stress that they're in, they're able to very quickly cut their costs by furloughing staff and just stopping buying anything. However, the big difference with dairy farms, Steve, next slide, is faced with no demand for the milk. It isn't possible just to cut your feed costs entirely, although Hefin given some fantastic ideas of how to reduce those purchase feed costs. It isn't possible just to furlough all your staff, and in short, it isn't possible just to mothball your business in the same way that other businesses are being asked to do. So dairy farms, there are different. And obviously, if you're a dairy farmer, you're looking at that slide and you're probably thinking, well, that's blinking obvious. But there will be people who are not dairy farmers that are tuned into this webinar. And I think while the government is under a lot of pressure from lots of different areas for support, it is worthwhile just pointing out the difference there between dairy farms and other businesses. It isn't possible just to stop. Cows still need looking after, they still need looking feeding, and you cannot mothball your business. So given that some farmers, unfortunately, are faced with having to discard milk or face very, very low prices for their milk, what can you do? Steve, next slide. Might be tempting to take the private Fraser approach and put your head in your hands and say we're doomed, or even Lance Corporal Jones running around, don't panic, don't panic. But actually, my first tip is that don't panic. So next slide. There is perhaps a temptation to just cut all costs, and certainly whatever spend you're making, as Neil said at the beginning, you need to look at that very, very hard. Is it an essential spend? However, I would just caution to please avoid short-termism. So, for example, at this time of year, many people will be doing routine vaccinations, for example, lepto-BVD. Please don't stop those, because you're going to end up with a lot more trouble when you need to try and make some decent profit coming out of this in 6 months or more time. And similarly, health testing. If you're testing for Johne's disease and you're testing for BVD routinely, these are normal disease management things which need to carry on, because this is fundamental to the bedrock of your business strength. Hefin, I think, has talked really nicely about which cows can benefit from being turned out to grass. I'd just add a word of caution, though, that unless you've got the correct cow type, and unless you've got that set up, then turning cows out to grass might not be possible for you. Otherwise, you'd probably be doing it already. Although I think Hefin has illustrated examples where it can be done, and I think Hefin made a good point about protecting the higher yielding cows. And particularly, I'm talking about the high input, high output kind of system. If there is a danger, you're turning your fresh carbers out in a high yielding system and they're Holsteins, and you haven't got the right grazing system and grass management, then you're going to not only knacker up your silage production for this year, but you're going to potentially damage the health of those cows and not get them back in calf and affect your business longer term. Next slide, please, Steve. There are things you can do, though. This is now not a time to carry any what I would call passenger cows. So, for example, cull those chronic mastitis cows, the repeat cases, the ones with high cell count, even if they're your high yielders, and also lame cows. Don't be carrying those cows at the moment. There's no need to keep them in the herd. They're costing you a lot of money and you don't need their milk. I would also say that now's a good time to actually take that first loss is best loss approach to sick cows. Don't be spending a whole load of money on treatments for cows that are having those repeat cases of mastitis, for example. I wouldn't necessarily say that's always the right advice. First loss is best loss, but at the moment, if you're finding yourself in a situation, it's sound advice. I would caution you to stop serving cows which are more than 200 days in milk, particularly if you're buying semen. It's just not going to be worth it, and those cows are not going to be profitable in your future days. So it's a good time to stop serving cows that are beyond 200 days of milk, if that isn't already your policy. And as Hefin said, dry off or cull stale cows. You may not be able to cull them because it depends a little bit on the demand for cull cows at the moment, but certainly they can be dried off, turned outside, and kept very cheaply. I had a bit of a wry amusement because I read Hefin's tweet and he just repeated it now, that some farmers have found that they've culled those cows and then found that the milk production hasn't gone down, but at least their costs have gone down. So you can pat yourselves on the back for the fact you've reduced your costs, learn the lesson for the future, and I suppose now just focus a little bit on trying to reduce some of those purchase feed costs to reduce the yields as well for the cows that are left in the herd. Okay, number 3, protect your pipeline, and in particular I'm thinking about your heifer pipeline. Don't do anything now that's going to jeopardize the future viability of your business, because it's the future viability of your business that will get you or us out of the what is hopefully a relatively short-term financial shock that we face at the moment. So the nature of dairy farming is very much that what you do now today is going to affect your profitability in the next 6, 12 months and beyond. So for example, don't cut back on feeding young stock, your heifer replacements I'm thinking here. Don't neglect disease control, and I'd include TB in that. Don't neglect feet and foot management, and please keep a focus on fertility and age at first calving. Those 2 things, good focus on fertility and reducing the age at first calving to around about 24 months for your heifers, are 2 of the most important veterinary aspects, if you like, of improving your or reducing your cost of production in the future and improving your profitability. So now probably is not the time actually to just stop your routine fertility visits. And then my 4th side is really just saying, well, this is an obvious cost that you can reduce for most dairy farms, is the cost of purchased milk replacer. Whole milk is a very good feed, almost it was designed for the job. But it is a good feed. Normally you buy milk replacer because you can sell your milk for more than it costs to purchase the milk replacer. When that gets reversed, it makes sense to feed whole milk. Just beware though of some of the potential health concerns of doing that. So if you're feeding unpasteurized pooled whole milk to your dairy heifer replacements and you are not a confirmed Johne's negative herd, then that is a big risk, and you're potentially shooting yourself in the foot and giving yourself big problems down the road with infecting your heifer calves, your pipeline, with Johne's disease. You must try and avoid that. So either pasteurize that milk or avoid feeding whole milk to your heifer replacements if you can't be sure of its Johne's status, or as Hefin said, consider, if you have been doing routine Johne's testing and you've got a robust handle on your Johne's status of your herd, then consider having a Johne's low risk group from which you're collecting milk to feed to your heifer replacements. Another health concern is that milk does go off very quickly. Don't store it. Be clean with preparation of the feeding equipment and so on, because you don't want to be landing up with calf scour in particular. And when I'm talking about feeding whole milk, I am not using that synonymously with feeding antibiotic or waste milk, i.e. milk from mastitic cows. Don't feed that. That isn't a good feed. We're talking about quality milk that you would otherwise be selling. So that wraps me up. Really, I'll finish on this. I guess my role in this is perhaps just to temper some of the advice that's been given before. All sound advice that we've had from Hefin and Neil, but I would just caution before making any rash decisions, take a little leaf out of Sergeant Wilson's book and ask yourself, do you think that's wise, sir? Thank you very much. Steve.
Lovely, thank you, Owen. That's fantastic. I might just straight away ask you one question, and it's something that Hefin alluded to. Dropping milking frequency, so from 3 times a day to twice a day. What are the potential herd health ramifications for that, and what things might you change in what you look for to make sure that your cows are still healthy?
Yeah, so 3 to twice is probably not a problem for most people in terms of trying to reduce output and reduce costs, and it would make sense. Cows don't like change, that's the thing. So if you're then going to go back up to 3 times a day milking, be prepared for some disturbance on the change down and then the change back up if that comes along in a couple of months' time. However, the other potential negative from a health point of view of dropping to 2 times a day from 3 is that it can be associated with a slightly higher mastitis risk, and that's because the more frequently you take the milk out of a cow's udder, the more the flushing effect, and therefore you actually can end up with better udder health. And that's true for robotic milking as well, where you've got a slightly higher milking frequency. However, not every farm sees that. Not every farm sees a reduction in mastitis when they go from 2 to 3 times a day. So likewise, I wouldn't expect most farms to see a radical mastitis risk going from 3 to 2 a day. From 2 times a day to 1 times a day, though, and unless you're a low input, low output kind of herd already, then you are more likely to see other health issues. And I'm talking clinical mastitis. You know, if you're dropping a high yielding cow down to once a day, it's quite a high risk, I would say, for a higher mastitis rate.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I'm going to change the subject ever so slightly and go to Neil. We've had a question about preparing cash flows, cash flow projections. How many months would you expect a farmer to need to do that for? So to prepare a cash flow projection for the bank?
Yeah, so I think you should probably, if you can, do it for a year, if you can. But even for the next 3 to 6 months, you know, just getting something pulled together that at least gives you and the banker a sort of good idea of what the position is going to look like in the short term. But yeah, look, I'd be looking at a year. And also what I would say is, as circumstances change, don't be scared to update that as to what things look like, just so that you know what it's going to turn out as. Don't do your plan today and then just stick it in the drawer tomorrow.
Right, I see. Excellent. And sort of, it's still a financial question. If we've put our own money into the farm, which has already been taxed, can we draw it out again tax-free later?
So I suppose the main thing is it will depend on how your business is set up. So I'm not trying to avoid the question, but you know, businesses are set up in all sorts of different ways: sole traders, partnerships, limited companies. Before sticking your own money in, I would probably just have a word with the accountant about the best way to do that, so that you can get it drawn back out again in a tax efficient manner when you can manage it. But yeah, look, there'll be different ways to do that depending on the business setup, Steve.
I see. No, marvelous. Thank you for that. Another question. Sorry, Neil, I'm picking on you.
Right.
So if there are farmers out there, and I think this is really relevant, who really need help making their case to the bank, but they can't afford to pay a professional advisor, is there scope for a farmer helps farmer efforts, or perhaps, you know, somebody with more experience in financial matters helping their less practiced or confident brethren?
There's always help to do. There's always things to do, joint venture, partnership type ideas, you know. And what I would say, you know, if you are sitting there in the position where you think, well, I don't really know how to do this myself. How can I afford to get somebody else in? If you think there's somebody there who can help you, you know, in any line of business, and you can get their advice, then what I would say is now's not a time to be proud about it. Just get on the phone and get talking to people and see what you can manage.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Neil. I think that's a good opportunity, actually, just to give a bit of a plug to our friends over at the Farming Community Network, who I know give farmers a lot of support, both in terms of mental health, but also there are potential for assistance or a bit of a steer on business matters. So also another RABI is another charity, farming charity, that are there to help farmers in this sort of situation. So that's an opportune moment to mention that. I'm going to move just across to Owen again. Sorry, Hefin, I'm not ignoring you, but we've got a lot of questions on this. Do you have any advice on drying off cows that are still milking well? So to put a bit of context in that, can not milking those cows out completely, can that help to reduce milk production?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, this, and it crops up a lot even outside this sort of scenario that we found ourselves in at the moment. You know, as cows become higher yielding, and people's fertility becomes better managed. You know, many people up and down the country normally find themselves drying off cows that are giving more than 20 litres, and I find there's a real mix of attitudes towards this amongst farmers, and some farmers sort of maybe overthink it a little bit and worry about how they're going to do it and go down to once a day milking initially and so on, and other farmers just dry them off, just stop milking them abruptly. And I suggest that's the way to go. By all means, then put them onto a restricted diet, so a straw diet, to try and dry them up very quickly from that point onwards. But it is safe to dry cows off abruptly, even if they're giving a lot of milk. And I would say, when I say a lot of milk, certainly up to 25 litres. If they're giving more than 30 litres a day, then question whether or not, if they're not due to be dried off, whether they are the right cows to be drying off. But don't overthink it. Don't worry about it. The reason why the question crops up a lot is to do with, is it okay to use just teat sealants and not antibiotics in those cows? And like I say, many farmers confidently just use teat sealants with abrupt dry off with cows that are giving between 20 and 25 litres and don't see problems with that. So yeah, it's, for those of you that are worried about drying off cows giving a lot of milk, it's probably less of an issue that you might first think.
Lovely, thank you, Owen. I am going to go over to you now, Hefin. There's a load of questions all about grazing, and I should mention I'm going to park those for a moment. If anybody's got a specific question about grazing that they need answered, you can contact us and we will put those in the answers at the end of the webinar. But we do have Piers Badnall for the next webinar next week, who will be able to address some of those more technical grass-based questions. But Hefin, what are your views on farmers who are currently using inoculants to increase the quality of the silage, sort of effectively saving money by now not doing that, reducing the quality of their silage? Sort of, what's the way up between whether you buy a product to increase the quality of the silage or effectively needing to buy purchase feed later on?
Well, I think, you know, when we're looking beyond this and we're looking into next autumn and winter, which is when that silage will essentially be fed, then we need to look at the whole silage making process, and as I mentioned in the slides, really focus on making high quality forage, because that will be one of the paybacks, if you like, to help refill the hole. Because there's no doubt that, you know, this scenario for herds that are in this situation with the milk processors in question, you know, they are going to have a hole to fill, and the only way that hole is going to be filled is through efficient milk production when things return to normal. So I think, you know, it's important, and I wouldn't just look at do you use an inoculant or not, but I think look at the whole sort of mindset around silage making in terms of, you know, what stage you're going to cut, the process you're going to go through. But I would say that if you've had a blueprint that has worked for you, and that includes using an inoculant in the past, and that you're happy with the forage quality that you've had, that I would be very, very loath to step away from that looking forward into this season. What I would be doing is speaking to suppliers, discussing payment terms, and explaining obviously the situation that you find yourself in. But there is no doubt that the impact, as many have seen in the last few years, where they've really focused on improving silage quality through cutting younger and, you know, getting you know, well fermented, high digestibility silage, the impact that has on production and feed cost is quite significant, and the payback is generally very, very good. So I think, you know, that definitely falls into the category of looking beyond the current crisis that we've got, and doing all we can to make sure that we're in a good position to refill the hole when the time comes.
Lovely. Thank you, Hefin, for that. I'm going to just ask one last question to Neil before I quickly wrap up. We're going to go over slightly, but it is completely relevant. There's one farmer here, and I think a lot of farmers will be in the same position, who have a self-employed member of staff through a particular recruitment company, and they'd be interested to know how they might go about furloughing that member of self-employed staff.
Yeah, good question. So there are slightly different versions of the world for those staff who are employed, who you can furlough. So a self-employed member of staff, so that's somebody who effectively is working on a contract basis and what I'm sort of operating on the basis of. There is a sort of help for self-employed individuals out there, and I think though that individual would have to look at that themselves rather necessarily than the farm business putting them out to furlough, if that makes sense. So there would be help for them as a self-employed individual, and there are certain rules that are available for that, and I won't go through them just now because of time, but they can be found online quite easily, or again talking to your own accountant or them talking to their accountant about it. But for furloughing, they really need to be an employee, a direct employee of yours. So I suppose in effect what I'm saying is you would need to say to that individual, look, we don't want you to work here anymore. We're not going to pay your contract rate, and you're self-employed, so you need to go and look at the self-employed individuals element of the support package to help you.
Okay, no, perfect. Thank you. I think you've addressed that just nicely. So I think I'm afraid I am going to have to, in the interest of time, I'm going to have to close the discussion there for now. We could easily fill another hour, I know that. We will answer any outstanding questions and post those on our website, and this has been recorded and it will be uploaded to YouTube. If you go to ahdb.org.uk and click on dairy, you'll see where you can find out more about what we've spoken about today. It's worth referencing also that we have podcasts and other webinars listed on there as well. You'll be able to get updates on dairy and beef markets every few days at the moment, and access to links that may help you in technical areas related to grass, livestock and staff, and a lot of the generic stuff that we've spoken about today. Please do look out for our next podcast. We're bringing Neil Wilson back. Hopefully we're going to be recording that tomorrow to perhaps elaborate on some of the details we've spoken about today. But we'll also be following up on some of these stories through our strategic dairy farmers through these difficult times. So it just really remains for me to thank our excellent speakers. Usually we do this through a round of applause, but nobody will be able to hear you. But thank you all. Thank our speakers for that. And next week we've got a new panel. We've got Oliver Hall from Anderson's, we've got Pierce Badnell from LIC, and we've got Tracy Towers from Oak Hill Vets. The date for that will be the 23rd of April, and we're an hour earlier, so we'll be at 12 noon for that. So thank you all for your attention.